Kristen Chevrier, and I'm here with Brett Wilcox and several other people, and we are getting ready to listen to Brett do a presentation on his book that he's written. This is JABBED, and it is a celebration of the movie Vaxxed and of the movement that goes with the movie Vaxxed. I met Brett because he had written a letter to the First Presidency of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints about vaccines and the issues surrounding vaccines and why we need to think more carefully about how we use vaccines. And I saw his letter online, and I decided that I would like to meet the person who wrote it, so I got in touch with him. And we knew each other for a month or so, and then I arranged for Andy Wakefield to come to Utah to speak. And Brett came all the way from Alaska to hear Andy speak. And since then, he's spent a huge amount of time studying vaccines. Come on in. And he has put it all in this book. One of the things that I love about the book is that I've spent 2 years studying, and I've felt like I was missing some puzzle pieces. And this book pulls all of that together for me. So all of the hundreds of hours that I have spent researching vaccines is pretty much crystallized in this book. So I really appreciate Brett putting it together, and here's Brett.
Thank you, Kristen. Writing about this subject has been really cool because it's introduced me to a lot of cool people, including Kristen Chevrier and the people with whom she associates. She is a political powerhouse, and she's an organizer, and I'm neither of those things. So I watch her and observe her. It's like I feel like I'm learning new skills all the time, skills that I will never have. And it's sure fun watching people that know how to move things and shape things and make things happen. So my primary focus is health. And a few years ago, my son said he wanted to run across the United States. He was about 12 years old at the time, and we thought that was a cute idea. But he wouldn't let it drop, so eventually my wife and I said, do we want our son to grow up in a home where your dreams are dreams that other people do, or are we going to do this? So we quit our jobs, and we went down to Huntington Beach, California, ran across the United States. It took us 6 months to get across, and I'll show a few more pictures. But I said to David before we started that I wanted to run on a platform. I'm very interested in health, the food movement, GMOs. So I wrote a book called Where Monsanto Feeding the World Lie After Lie, and passed out 3,000 GMO-free seed packets as we ran across the United States. After I got back, I did a sequel to that, Where Monsanto is Still Feeding the World Lie After Lie, book 2. And book 1 was published in Japanese, and for a while it nearly broke into the top 100 in Amazon Japan. So it was really selling there. It was a great thing, kind of a fun thing to see your book come out in Japanese, especially since our first 2 children were born in Japan when we were over there teaching English. So this is David, who was 15 at the time when we did the run. We picked up Jenna at a shelter, and Olivia was 13. And Chris and Olivia were the support crew, and we did the run. That shows the route finished in Ocean City, New Jersey on July 19th, 2014, which happened to also be our 25th wedding anniversary. So it was a nice way to celebrate that. And there we are at the finish line. While we were running across the United States, we met parents of autistic kids, and several of them said yes, it was the vaccines. And I was about to become a grandfather. I was very interested in that topic, and the more I looked into it, the more I wondered whether the vaccine industry is really just a mirror image or a kissing cousin of the GMO industry. And then we'd been home a month when William Thompson, a CDC whistleblower, a senior scientist at the CDC, came out through his lawyer on his website and confessed that he and his colleagues had essentially thrown away the data, doctored the data that showed the connection between the MMR vaccine and autism. And that really got me wondering whether the vaccine industry is no better than the biotech industry, complete with the government pharma revolving door, fraudulent science, bribes, threats against, and intimidation of dissenting scientists, tainted educational curricula, industry PR machines pretending to be media, etc. So you can't study the subject of vaccines without having the name Andrew Wakefield come up. And it's a very, very powerful name, and people have a visceral response to that name that they've been conditioned to have. So when you bring that up, you're stepping into scary territory. And so I thought, what is it about this man that so much of the vaccine story seems to hinge on this one man, and why is it that it seems to hinge on that man? So I bought both of his books, and I read them, and Kristen contacted me and said, we're going to have Andy come to Utah. And it about took my breath away, because I was aware that this man was mythological at that point. And what really got me was, from a religious point of view or a spiritual point of view, I thought, how can a man respond with such grace to such venom? And I'd always seen him respond with grace to life-destroying venom. Lost his medical license, and I don't think any man in the history of the world may have had as many lies spread about him as Andy Wakefield. And yet he always responds so gracefully. And I thought there is something spiritual about this guy. And I have no idea what his spiritual belief is or anything like that. But I know that he responds to hatred with love. And that fascinated me. I wanted to go to Utah and wanted to meet this guy. It was a transformative experience. It was less than a year ago that I met Andy when he came down here a year ago, and he spoke in an American Fork and the Boy Scout building. And then in February, a man contacted me in charge of a health conference, and he said, I want you to come down to Florida in September and speak on the subject of GMOs. And I said, I'm really interested in vaccines right now. I'm still really obsessed over it. And I said, if I promise you, I will have a book ready for you by the conference, which was last week. Will you let me talk on vaccines? And I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to get back. Well, I'll tell the story. Sorry. Anyway, he said, do you have the science? And I said, yes, I have the science. There was no doubt of that. I have the science. And more than that, I knew that the other side did everything they could to hide the science from us. And that became more of the focus of my book. It's less about vaccines and more about the people that perpetrate the fraud of the vaccine industry. So you learn very early on that what they say about Andy, how he was the man that said that the MMR vaccine caused autism. And when you get and actually read the study that was published in the Lancet in '98, and you read that they did not prove an association between measles, mumps, rubella vaccine and the syndrome described, you say, wow, this is powerful. You've got all these powerful, powerful people saying, Andy Wakefield did this, as if he operated alone, as if he alone wrote this paper, and then you find out that there were a total of 13 people, world-renowned scientists, doctors, putting this paper together. And this is what they said. And yet, anytime you turn on the mainstream media, you'll hear, Andy Wakefield said this, and it's been debunked. You'll never hear about the other 12. You'll never hear that he didn't say it. So it's a bunch of malarkey. Oh, don't do that to me. Okay, technical difficulty.
There you go. You're back.
Let's see if that will get us going again. There we go. So Eliana, who's making the noise tonight, got to meet Andy Wakefield last year when she was a little less than a year old, I guess, yeah. And got to meet Andy privately the next morning at breakfast, listened to the talk, and this is a talk that he gives around the world, and talked about autism and the gastrointestinal disease that is a part of the MMR vaccine, which gets their guts sick, which then causes the behavioral symptoms known as autism. This is Professor John Walker Smith, who also lost his medical license, and what the media will not tell you is that he fought in court. He went to the High Court in England. He appealed, and he won. And not only did he win, but the judge criticized the disciplinary panel's inadequate and superficial reasoning, and in a number of instances, a wrong conclusion. The judge said it would be a misfortune if this were to happen again. He urged that in future such cases should be chaired by someone with judicial experience. The judge just spanked the General Medical Council and gave the medical license back to John Walker Smith. Yes?
And you probably might bring it up that Dr. Wakefield didn't pursue the thing in court because he didn't have the resources to hire attorneys and legal representation, I believe.
I'm going to try to repeat what I hear here just to make sure that people can hear it. The comment is that Andy Wakefield did not do the same. He didn't pursue legal recourse to try to get his license back because of financial restraints. Is that correct? Yes, that's my understanding of the situation. That's why he didn't do that. The charges leveled against John Walker Smith and Andy Wakefield were virtually identical. So Andy Wakefield is a very humble man. He's all the time saying that this is not about him. What happens to him is irrelevant. And it's not exactly true, because the industry has made sure that it's not true. They've turned him into a cartoon caricature. He's no longer a human being. He is Satan himself. And anytime you hear the topic of vaccines brought up, they say, well, Satan said this. And it's almost that powerful. It's almost that black and white. And so when you meet the man who is allegedly Satan, and you read how his interest is in the children, and he always says, it's always about the children, it's always been about the children, it's not about me. I think we have to step back and say, we appreciate your humility, but it is about you. And because of the way he carries himself, they could not have picked a person that they shouldn't have picked more than Andy Wakefield, because of the way he carries himself. He doesn't sully himself at all. Everything he says is very measured, and he doesn't say anything that would not be supportable. So he goes on to say that the underbelly of all of this requires that you trust in the policy makers, and he says nobody can believe in the CDC. I believe this is really this is a passive sentence up here. What happened to me, and the problem with passive sentences is that they hide the doers, the action in the sentence. And so what happened to him is really, who did this to him? Who caused this to happen? And then you get the answer down here. The underbelly of all of this is the policymakers, the CDC. And when you examine that, then you get to the truth of what the vaccine industry is all about. And my book really, the title of the book is How the Vaccine Industry, Medical Establishment, and Government Stick to You and Your Family. So I write more about that than about the vaccines themselves, although I do cover some of the vaccines, yes.
I was going to make a comment in that meeting that Andy Wakefield came to. I have 2 autistic children, and I have 4 autistic nieces and nephews. And my whole family came to that presentation, and we've been studying autism for 5 years, traveling the country quite a lot. And I've never met him, that was the first time. But one of the things he said, someone asked him if he feared for his safety.
Yeah.
And the words he said were, some things are worth dying for,
Yeah.
and your children are one of those things.
Yeah.
The spirit that was so strong when he said that, everybody was in tears.
Yeah.
Literally, it touched you to your heart that people were bawling. And you felt that it was true. So that's it. When you talk about that, that's a great thing to mention that statement. No one had heard it before, but it made us understand.
I hope we're able to hear what's being said, because if I tried to repeat that, I would break down and cry. And I look really ugly when I cry. So I'm not going to repeat that. So when this gentleman asked me if I could give a presentation and did I have the science, he was really talking about this over here. He was talking about the vaccine science, because that's what we assume we're talking about when we talk about vaccines. But I think there's a whole other branch of science, or branches of science, that need to be looked at when you're talking about the industry. And I've got a whole bunch of stuff in here that is really covered in my book. And we're really talking about, I believe, the face of evil, if I may use that word. And it's a fascinating discussion. So here's some questions that if we'll have time, I'll ask these at the end of the presentation. Who is really anti-science? This is a swear word that they throw out about people such as myself and Kristen. Who are the real vaccine deniers? That's another swear word that's recently been thrown out towards people like us. And who is really anti-vaccine? So this is the common doctrine that I'm going to go over very briefly. Disease is bad, period. Vaccines are good, period. Okay? Vaccines protect against disease except when the vaccinated are in the presence of the unvaccinated. High vaccination rates create herd immunity. All doctors and scientists agree that vaccines are safe and effective. The science is settled. Vaccines strengthen the immune system. Now, if we all looked like that when we got our vaccines, we would buy into it a lot easier. People with weak immune systems need vaccines even more than healthy people. This is what we're learning as we watch the videos that are coming out from around the country from the Vax team. Weak, premature kids their parents are being pressed to vaccinate these kids to great harm. And we learned from Paul Offit, the prophet of the pro-vaccine movement, that babies can tolerate 100,000 vaccines at a time.
Did you spell that P-R-O-F-I-T?
Yes, P-R-O-F-I-T, probably, yeah. All right. And this is a core doctrine that is essential to understand. That is that vaccines do not cause autism. Repeat, they do not cause autism. And the CDC is fond of saying, we don't know what causes autism, but we know it's not the vaccines. How do we know that? Science. And we're going to talk a little bit about science and how that word has been co-opted to be something that it really isn't. So if there's any risk from vaccines, it is small compared to the risk of disease. Vaccines serve the greater good. And people who vaccinate are smart, scientifically minded, and responsible members of society. People who delay or abstain from vaccinations are selfish, uneducated anti-science Luddites. And it's official. If there's anything to be blamed that's wrong in the world, it's my fault. So, disease and the science of vaccinology. So, what do you notice about the science of vaccinology? And beyond that, what is science? What does that word even mean? So, science asks questions. It's open to all possibilities. It's rational, and it fosters discussion. And vaccinology has all the answers. It's rigid and inflexible. It's absurd. 100,000 vaccines worth of absurd. And it fosters intolerance and discrimination. So I believe, and many have said this long before me, that vaccines is not so much a science as it is a religion. It's the antithesis of science. And not only that, it's a bad religion. The church leaders use fear, trauma, and tyrannical laws to control behavior. They fake miracles, they rewrite history, limit access to information, dispense disinformation, crush medical dissent, and punish dissent. The congregants live in a hypnotic state. They have a loss of critical thinking skills. They submit to authority. They exchange medical freedom for medical tyranny. And they demonstrate ignorant certainty, intolerance, prejudice, and discrimination. I often think that it's like 0% knowledge with 100% certainty, which is a very hard conversation to have with people when they're coming at you from that angle. A subsect of the religion of vaccinology is a subsect of the religion of scientism. So science is nothing more than a method of learning. Scientism is a belief and conviction that anything with the word science attached to it is truth. And there's a lot of people nowadays who have abandoned traditional religion, and they've stepped easily into the religion of science. And you'll hear people all the time saying, I don't do religion, I do science. Science is my thing. And they don't know that science can be bought and corrupted just as easily as religion can be bought and corrupted. Robert Mendelsohn, clear back in '79, talked about the religion of modern medicine, and also referred to vaccines extensively in this book as one of the sacraments, in an unsafe sacrament in the religion. Tony Bark said vaccinology is a belief system, it's a religion. Some churches talk about the Holy Trinity. In my book, I describe the unholy Trinity: the vaccine industry, the medical establishment, and the government, hence the subtitle of my book, so they stick it to you and your family. Most people, when they think of the structure of the vaccine world, they think of the CDC and the FDA. And really, this is more of the structure of the vaccine industry. It's everywhere. When I got into it and saw all these organizations that were listed right on the CDC website as partners in the vaccine, in the pro-vaccine movement, it's worldwide, it's everywhere, it's everything, and it's quite overwhelming to see how big it is. Church authorities in this church are scientists, doctors, government representatives, I am none of those things, so none of what I say here matters, which probably means I'm safe talking about it because I'm not a doctor and I'm not a scientist, and if I were either of those things, what I'm saying could get me in a lot of trouble. But because I'm not part of the church clergy, I don't think I'm a big threat to anybody. The church seminaries, we've got the medical schools, church scripture, curricula, scientific journals, government pronouncements, the church creed. Vaccines would save more lives than any other medical intervention. And anytime you read anything from the government about vaccines, this will be the opening line. This will be the opening paragraph. Even when they're about to say, we're killing kids, they'll still open up with this paragraph.
We got a billboard on I-15, I don't know who paid for it. Maybe we did, their taxes. It says vaccines save lives.
Yeah, that's the creed.
Yeah.
Number one creed. Vaccines are safe and effective and necessary. You can't talk about vaccines without hearing the phrase safe and effective. And when you analyze the fact that what we're talking about is chemicals being injected into babies, to make such a black and white statement in and of itself invalidates the people making the statement. You can't inject chemicals, the same chemicals, into people who are different in different levels of health and all these other variables that are out there and say safe and effective, period. It's ludicrous.
They're not just chemicals, they're toxins.
Yes, toxins, indeed.
Neurotoxins.
Neurotoxins, nephrotoxins, carcinogens, contaminants. Vaccines provide salvation against the hell of infectious disease. Vaccines create herd immunity. Vaccinating is a moral responsibility. Vaccines do not cause autism. There's 4 types of people that I describe in the book. Vaccine believers. These are the people that have an uncritical faith in vaccines. The vaccine informed. These are people who realize that the doctor says, I want to vaccinate your 1-day-old infant with a disease that he or she couldn't possibly have. And in that moment, you question and then you do a little research and you say, that doesn't make any sense at all. So that's becoming vaccine informed is a journey. It's certainly not a destination. The people that study this for decades are still on the journey. But all of us, when we get those little teeny glimpses of awareness, we are becoming informed. I talk about 2 types of vaccine sociopaths in my book, believing sociopaths and informed sociopaths. These are the vaccine believers who it's a religious-based belief system. It's really not based on science. Vaccine informed who are in some stage of knowing and learning. The vaccine sociopaths, the good sociopaths, those are 2 words you don't normally pair together. But good people who have good intentions, whose belief in vaccines is so strong that they are able to justify the commission of sociopathic acts. I would credit some of the people in the CDC who hide the fact that they find the evidence of MMR being linked to autism or thimerosal being linked to autism. And what do they do with that? They hide it, they doctor the data, they dumb it down to where they say, no, that's not there. I believe that's a sociopathic act. They believe they're doing it for the greater good, for the benefit of the people. It is nonetheless a sociopathic act. Being a doctor and telling a mom you're going to call the authorities because she's not vaccinating, or actually taking it beyond that and ensuring that children are removed from the home, I believe these are sociopathic acts. These are dangerous acts that are done that hurt people, hurt children, hurt parents, make us all afraid. Vaccine-informed sociopaths are not good people. They know about all the garbage. They know about all the corruption. And they only, what they care about is how they're going to spin that corruption so that they can continue to do what they're doing. These are not good people. The vaccine paradigm can only thrive, the vaccine program can only thrive because of the vaccine paradigm. This is a religious-based belief system that gives people an irrational fear of disease coupled with an irrational belief in the safety, efficacy, and necessity of vaccines, which results in an unquestioning vaccine compliance in believers and mandatory compliance in the vaccine informed. So paradigm components are the way they control the story. And there's a lot to the story that goes back hundreds of years. I'm going to talk about these a little bit in detail. So we've already talked about pro-vaccine. This is the way they define the words that they use to describe people. Anti-vaccine are described that way. Vaccine. Now, I need to pause and slow down just a little bit, okay? Because we are in the paradigm. When I use the vaccine, if you grew up in this world where you were exposed to the word vaccine, and you knew that the vaccine, the word was associated with safe and effective, it became synonymous with safe and effective. The very meaning of the word vaccine, it is imbued with those characteristics, safety and efficacy. So much so that when we use the word, and we'll never interchange the word vaccine with drug or medicine, as if they're somehow different. But a vaccine is a drug. When we use the word drug, we can say, well, there's some good things that come from the drug, there's some bad things that come from the drug, but we don't have that mental reaction when we use the word vaccine. The word vaccine triggers that trans-hypnotic response, which almost makes people want to bow down and worship and say, this is the answer, this is what will save us from the hell of infectious disease. So even using the word is dangerous because it invokes the paradigm. The word immunization is another word that is misused commonly. I drove past the public health building downtown, and it had up there on the signboard, it said immunizations. And so now regular people, normal people, cannot tell the difference between the word immunization and the word vaccination. They are synonyms in their minds. And when you find out that immunization is a process getting immunized as a result of getting a disease, which leaves you with lifelong immunity, and you find out that vaccination is really just a medical procedure, which may or may not produce some temporary dysfunctional form of immunity, when you find that out, you realize that even using the word immunization, when we should be using the word vaccination, is an affront. It's offensive, because it creates the wrong impression. Pro-vaccine, anti-vaccine, vaccine-preventable disease, it's a common phrase now which gives us the impression if there's a disease out there and they've got a vaccine for it, if you don't get the vaccine, you're going to get the disease. If you do get the vaccine, you won't get the disease, neither of which is true. These are powerful swear words. Science, anti-science, science deniers, vaccine deniers, they throw these words out as a way of slurs. These are not racial slurs, these are slurs towards the vaccine in form. It's a form of discrimination. Personal belief exemption. I really do not like this phrase. It's the official phrase for people who choose not to vaccinate, whether they get a religious exemption or a philosophical exemption. They call them personal beliefs, and I don't like it because it implies that it's personal, that it's odd, that it's eccentric, it's out of the norm. The fact is, virtually everyone who gets an exemption does it because of the science, not in spite of the science. There should be a science-based exemption to vaccines, which will never happen.
That's a good point.
Autism, according to the official doctrine, is not a problem, not increasing, not an epidemic, and it's something to be celebrated. And most importantly, it's genetic. Yes?
You don't hear anybody touting a vaccine for autism.
Oh, but they're working on one.
Yeah.
I've heard they're working on such a thing.
They
Yes.
have vaccines for everything.
Yes.
You can put a vaccine for autism.
Okay, and even the words CDC and FDA conjure up this impression that you're talking about regulatory agencies who are filled with sincere, honest people of integrity who are there to protect our interests and protect our children. And when you find out that really they are just working for pharma, then you gain some freedom and independence when you can separate yourself from the paradigm. So starting with the smallpox narrative, we learned that the official narrative is not true. We learned that the people that really did best during the smallpox era were the people that chose not to vaccinate. And they had fewer incidents of the disease, less incidents of the disease, and we also know that only 10% of the population was ever vaccinated, which makes the claim that the vaccine eradicated smallpox ludicrous. Same things can be said about polio. Suzanne Humphrey's seminal book, Dissolving Illusions, which I highly recommend if you haven't read it already. All of the epidemics for which drug companies created vaccines were well into their decline or gone before the vaccine was introduced on a mass scale. The real reasons for the decline of the epidemics of smallpox, measles, polio, etc. were improvements in hygiene, sanitation, nutrition, working conditions, and clean water delivery. The vaccines came in well after the fact. Then the vaccine makers, conventional medicine, wrongly took credit for it. Suzanne was not the first person to say that. Numerous people have been saying that for over a century. This is well known, well documented. And they control the message. I want to talk a little bit about reductionist science, because the idea that vaccines are good and disease are protective, absence of vaccines is dangerous, this is all reductionist science. So when you move over to the other side, and I just call this big picture science, you learn that yes, antibody titers do increase with vaccination, but it also impacts countless other physiological functions, both known and unknown at this point. Vaccines contain neurotoxins, nephrotoxins, carcinogens, contaminants, etc. Toxins are by definition toxic. So if a vaccine spills on the floor or breaks on the floor, they call in hazmat. If they inject it into your baby, it's safe and effective. Vaccine injury is normal and expected. The question is not if vaccines injure, the question is to what degree they injure. Why? Because toxins are by definition toxic. Everyone who is injected with toxins experiences a toxic reaction to one degree or another. Vaccine injury is 100%. Vaccines are associated with over 200 diseases, symptoms, or conditions. And in exchange for temporary, dysfunctional, and incomplete protection from often benign diseases, children now experience epidemics of autism, allergies, ADHD, asthma, autoimmune disorders, and those are just the A's. So Suzanne Humphreys again talking about how even the smartest immunologists really don't know much about how the immune system works. The myth of herd immunity. This is powerful. There is no such thing as vaccine-induced herd immunity. This is powerful because this is the one narrative that gets socially minded people to vaccinate, because the idea is if they don't do it, they're not doing their social, moral responsibility. There is no such thing as vaccine-induced herd immunity. It doesn't exist. It never has. The vast majority of adults have zero immunity from vaccines, and we have not been having huge outbreaks of disease. Let's please just stop talking about how we're going to lose herd immunity if we stop vaccinating. We can't lose what we've never had. So how many of you have received your vaccination boosters within the last 10 years? Oops, my hand is not up.
I don't know. Mine isn't either.
Has anyone received boosters in the last 10 years? Okay, there's a couple of people here.
You're gonna stone me right now, or?
Yeah, we'll do the stoning after. You may have some immunity because the vaccines do provide some temporary immunity. The titers go up, and in some cases that does provide some efficacy. You may have something that the rest of us don't have, but the fact is the vast majority of us as adults have virtually zero immunity to from the vaccines, because the vaccines have long since worn off. So when they make a big deal about vaccinating all the 5-year-olds, because if we don't, we're going to lose herd immunity. Everyone in here is vaccinated. Virtually no one in here is immunized. It's an important point to remember. This article came out in The Hill last week. The title is, "If Only Half of America is Properly Vaccinated, Where Are the Epidemics?" Remember that. This is important. When they try to sell you on herd immunity, remember that vaccines may have a place in our medical arsenal, but they are not the silver bullet they're portrayed to be. Year after year, the pharmaceutical industry, looking for lucrative new profit centers, turns out new vaccines. They use pseudoscience to convince the public that these products are safe and effective, and they use public shaming to convince the citizenry that non-vaccine is a public health threat. The entire racket completely falls apart with a close examination of the herd immunity myth. Until we are honest in our assessment of both safety and efficacy of vaccines, kids will continue to be hurt, rights will continue to be trampled, and the mythology will continue to trump science. I love this because it came out of The Hill. And in Washington, D.C., they're pushing hard to do away with our individual rights, our constitutionally protected rights. Yes, sir? Do you have a comment? No comment, okay. I was an auctioneer in a previous life, and I saw the movement, I was jumping on it. All right, vaccine dogma. The dogma has always been that vaccines are safe and effective. And along with that was the doctrine of herd immunity. And back a long time ago, we used to believe that unvaccinated are freeloaders, which means they take advantage of everyone else doing their civic duty, and we're freeloading. We're getting the benefits of the vaccine without assuming any of the risks. Nowadays, these two doctrines have morphed into a really bizarre third doctrine, and that is that vaccines are safe and effective, and they protect against disease, except when in the presence of the unvaccinated. Wrap your head around that if you can, because many, many people believe this. So the vaccine freeloaders, the unvaccinated are no longer freeloaders, they are filthy vectors of disease. That's why our children, unvaccinated children, cannot go to school and associate with vaccinated kids, because the unvaccinated kids will get the vaccinated kids who supposedly have protection against the disease if they associate with the vaccinated kids.
Well, I was going to comment on that. Most people, if you try to explain that to them, they say, oh, we're doing it for the immunocompromised. I'm immunocompromised.
What about the immunocompromised?
And a recently vaccinated child is significantly more dangerous to me than my unvaccinated children.
Yes.
Yeah.
My children's school does a vaccine clinic every parent-teacher conference. Because of that, I can't attend parent-teacher conference because they're shooting people with the MMR and it sheds, and chickenpox vaccines, and they shed live virus, and it could literally kill me.
So if there was any science to the idea of quarantining kids from the public schools, we would quarantine the recently vaccinated kids because they are shedding the virus. We would quarantine people who actually carry disease. We would quarantine the people that actually have Hep B or HIV or any other contagious disease. But instead, we choose to quarantine healthy children.
Well, in hospitals, where there's difficult things, if you're vaccinated, you can't go in there. If you go to old folks' homes, they say if you're recently vaccinated, you can't go in.
They understand the science. Public schools don't have that. So I call this an epidemic of nonsense. And Libertarian candidate Gary Johnson said about a month ago, I've come to find out that without mandatory vaccines, the vaccines that would in fact be issued would not be effective. So it's dependent that you have mandatory vaccines so that every child is immune. Otherwise, not all children will be immune even though they receive a vaccine. So that is the doctrine of nonsense being expressed there. I've had people say he's since reversed the reversal. I searched online to try to find the reversal of the reversal, but I couldn't find it. If it's out there, then I apologize to Mr. Johnson.
But still, the fact that he says.
The fact that he said it and believed it shows something that's a little nonsense.
Now there's nobody left.
Kind of like the libertarian.
Oh,
Okay, so the industry does a great job of controlling the media. It took Stephen King 3 months to figure that out. Oh boy, why does it want to do that to me?
You know, I want to see what that's at too.
Let's see what we can do to get this back.
It's immunocompromised.
Yes. Here's the vaccine.
Here, everyone.
I don't like that one. Let's see what that does.
To be inoculated.
So after 3 months, oh boy.
Yeah.
Really, it only takes one program. You can't even do a whole program without seeing at least 3 commercials.
Let's see if I can get this.
Even on the radio. Or the local raps too.
Okay, I'm going to try this button again and see what happens.
Can you go back?
Yeah, let me put it back there. How are we doing on the time? What time is it?
Says video.
10 to 8.
10 to 8, okay. Medical education, we need to get rid of the idea that medical education is really medical education. It's pharma-sponsored education. This was New England Journal of Medicine who wrote this book and made this statement. That's a powerful statement. Good? Again, the idea that scientific journals really are scientific journals now. It's time to let that go because the scientific journals are profit centers as well, and they're controlled by the industry as well. Richard Smith, the former editor of the British Medical Journal, said medical journals are an extension of the marketing arm of the pharmaceutical companies, controlling government bodies. Senator Abraham Ribicoff talked about the big problems about the revolving door and being enmeshed with each other. And he said it's really a problem. What year did he say this?
Probably 1969.
Close. He said that in 72, more than 40 years ago. And what was bad then is far worse now.
I didn't understand. It's in there.
So the compliance formula, this is something I talked about in JABBED. The compliance formula is done by giving us an irrational fear of infectious disease coupled with an irrational belief that vaccines safely protect disease, and that produces vaccine compliance. If you don't have the first two pieces in place, no one would do this. They would never allow anyone to do that to their child. So, to create fear among parents to strengthen their motivation to vaccinate is an important part of the publicity used to promote vaccinations. A whole branch of research is examining the question, what level of fear needs to be created to appear as convincing as possible. This is shown in the mainstream magazines now. It's grandma and grandpa. They are the wolves that are going to devour their grandkid because they are not vaccinated against pertussis. So they need to go get that vaccine, so they don't give their kids whooping cough. What the industry doesn't tell you, GSK and Merck and the others that make that, is the vaccine does do a pretty good job of masking the symptoms of whooping cough, but it doesn't prevent the transmission of whooping cough. So grandma and grandpa get the vaccine, they're carriers now, got it, and because they don't know they're sick, they don't know to quarantine themselves, so they go to play with the grandkid and bad things happen. Gardasil commercials, you may have seen those on TV. These are the 12-year-old kids that are guilt tripping their parents for causing their cancer, and they could have done something about it if they had only gotten the HPV vaccine. And this one is my favorite. I have a special connection with this one. I can hardly read this out loud without grimacing. The swelling's not so bad, it's the severe testicular pain. And the beauty of this one is that the mumps vaccine is a fraud, and the Merck scientists are now, this is in federal court, where they've come out and said that they were forced to fake the efficacy of the vaccine. And even in the laboratories, they added rabbit's blood to the tests to get pretend to get the efficacy that they say is there, because they didn't have it. They had to fake it in order to keep the monopoly on the MMR vaccine. So there we go, a classic example of vaccine science. All right, this is interesting. This is a PowerPoint. Actually, the official PowerPoint, real PowerPoint from this Glenn Nowak guy. And you can see his title up there. He's with the CDC. I call him a compliance formula instructor. He's giving a presentation to the media. He's teaching the media how to talk to the public about the flu vaccine. Safer, healthier people. So this is the recipe. He actually calls it a recipe. In order to foster public interest and to get high vaccine demand and increase industry profits, we need to factor that out. This is really important. Influenza's arrival coincides with immunization season. And I love that because that's really what it is. They call it the flu season, but in truth, what the CDC is marketing is a flu vaccine season. The vaccine is being marketed. This is what you're supposed to say. The dominant strain and/or initial cases of the disease are associated with severe illness and/or outcomes. It occurs among people for whom influenza is not generally perceived to cause serious complications, and it happens in cities and communities with significant media outlets. Isn't that amazing? This terrible flu epidemic is hitting cities with media outlets. It wouldn't be a big deal if it happened in the middle of nowhere.
Or media outlets, vectors of the flu.
They're vectors of propaganda. So it doesn't matter what year it is, whether any of this stuff is based on anything real. You're just supposed to say this year after year after year. So the medical experts and public health authorities publicly state concern and alarm. This is what, again, the CDC telling the media, these are the words you're supposed to use when you talk about the flu season going on. Dire outcomes, urge influenza vaccination. It's going to be very severe, more severe than last year, and it's going to be deadly. can anything be more blatant than that? It's going to cause severe illness. A perception. This word perception is going to come up again in my presentation. It's all about perception. This is not about science. This is not about reality. This is about perception. You're going to be susceptible to the bad case of influenza. It's going to be really serious. It's going to hit your kids. You've got to get those people vaccinated. It's going to be like a pandemic. And of course, we've got to get to the importance of vaccination. Concern, anxiety, worry, perception, bad illness, perception. All right. Evidence of the vaccine paradigm. So the vaccine paradigm is really invisible. Our culture is largely invisible to us until we go to another country. And we realize that other people do things differently. And then we can say, oh, that's how I'm different, and this is part of my culture. The paradigm is invisible until you step outside of it, and then you can see it. So let's examine some of the evidence of the paradigm. Irrational fear of disease. The Disneyland hysteria outbreak was a good example of the paradigm at work. In the 1960s, measles was a self-limiting infection, short duration, moderate severity, and low fatality. It was the subject of sitcom humor, and there were virtually 0 deaths in developed countries before the measles vaccine was introduced. Now, a minor disease outbreak with 0 fatalities generates hundreds of hyped-up news stories used to justify the eventual passage of California's SB 277 and the CDC's unconstitutional proposal to detain, quarantine, forcibly vaccinate, and monitor U.S. citizens without due process. And I need to make sure we've got time at the end of this presentation to go into this last point more in depth. Del Bigtree, the producer of the movie Vax, loves to chew out the media because he is the media. He was with the program, the doctors did this for years. And he says, why did we make such a big deal out of it when only 644 people got it? That's 0.00002 people in the country, which effectively translates to 0 when we have 1 in 45 kids now diagnosed with autism. We never heard about that. Thank you. I plugged it in and it found a glitch. Okay, irrational belief in vaccines. This is Richard Camp, the voice of SB 277. And this is him talking about how wonderful vaccines are. They say, oh, I'm worried about formaldehyde, I'm worried about aluminum. Thimerosal is not a child-like vaccine. That's not true. It isn't a flu vaccine, which is recommended for all kids. And there are trace amounts in several other vaccines. People say they are worried about thimerosal. You know what's the most dangerous substance in vaccines? Water. More children die of water toxicity than anything else that's in a vaccine. This is the man that helped do away with personal exemptions in California.
And he conferenced with the industry lobbyists when there was some friction in the vote as to which direction he should go.
He conferenced with the industry lobbyists when what?
When the vote was being taken.
When
They
the
were
vote was
standing
being
by
taken.
his side. They were talking apparently on
Pulling his
screens.
strings. Yeah. Thank you.
Well, it's really bad that he makes such a comment about water since most of the autism deaths are from drowning.
That is a poignant point. One of the most common causes of autism, common causes of death for autistic kids is drowning, because many kids with severe autism wander and they have no fear of water. So again, the concept that 100,000 vaccines are safe. This is an irrational belief. You first, Paul. All right, irrational fear of healthy, unvaccinated people. This is part of the paradigm, and it's part of the paradigm that we're living under now. So a long time ago, we quarantined leopards for their entire lives. 100 years ago, we quarantined smallpox people who had smallpox while they were contagious. Now, we are proposing to quarantine healthy kids 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. Now, can you imagine that if people back then said, we're going to quarantine healthy kids 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, in order to protect the vaccinated people, they would laugh at us. And if these people 100 years ago said you're doing what? You're taking the healthy kids, and you're separating them from other kids to keep them all safe, and it's only 6 hours a day, 5 days a week. So this type of belief system spawns hatred. And the hatred is quite unstoppable and it's growing. This is the type of thing you'll find on the internet. The unvaccinated should be corralled into their own society with the hopes that Child Protective Services would soon pay a visit, and maybe the sheriff too, to take unvaccinated children away and to arrest the unvaccinated, uneducated parents who willingly choose to expose the public to disease. Because it's unfair for vaccinated people to be subjected to the unvaccinated. That's why. This is hate speech. If I said this about people of different religions or different sexual orientations, if I said this sort of thing, it wouldn't work. I would lose my job for saying that sort of thing. But people, mainstream people can say this, and everybody goes like this. Because they all belong to the Church of Vaccinology. And they're all living in the vaccine paradigm, and they don't recognize that this is indeed hate speech, fosters discrimination and intolerance. And this type of thing will be what's one of the things that's used to take away our rights as American citizens. Okay, I am not picking on BYU or the BYU nursing program, but they've got a 2-minute video online where they talk about the facts regarding vaccinating. Immunizations, as they call it. So I'm going to start by correcting one fact, and that is that you're not immunizing, you're vaccinating. So according to this video, which is on the BYU nursing site, and I could have probably gone to any nursing school in the country and found similar videos. But I saw this, and it struck me in the gut so hard, I just could not believe that this would be out there. That they would say that the only side effect from the DTaP is irritability. And they're putting this out to nurses, and they're putting this out on their website for the public. They're giving the public the impression that DTaP makes kids irritable. And that if you don't get it, this is what you're at risk of. So, what they don't mention are a few of the other side effects that are associated with DTaP. And I have to say that when I see this stuff, if my kid was getting these things after getting the DTaP, I think my kid would probably be irritable. But I think that's accurate. I think beyond irritable, I think my kid would be screaming. Encephalopathy has got to hurt like heck. I think my kid would scream.
Is this on the insert?
Yes.
And that they can read it?
Yeah, this is the package insert. So here's another thing that would make me irritable. This is the woman who put her child in a pertussis study. 130 babies started, 100 finished because 30 pulled out because of the reactions. They simply did away with those 30 and said that the acellular vaccine was 100% safe. She said, how very convenient, just leave out those injured and dead. It's all smoke and mirrors. These studies are designed to report perfect results, not the truth. This is vaccine science. And when you can't report the real side effects, that shows you who is really anti-vaccine. When you have to hide it because you're ashamed of it, because it doesn't say what you wanted to say, who are the real anti-vaxxers? Okay, another comparison. MMR vaccine, you get it versus not getting it. And you can see that when you get the vaccine, your kid's going to be a little red, rash, fever, sore. This is still all from this video. It's a 2-minute long video. You'll find it there. You will not be able to post comments. So these are the adverse reactions that are associated with the MMR vaccine. And the MMR vaccine, we know from the government itself, from the CDC, that MMR is associated with autism and dozens of other adverse reactions. And the nurse's video has this to say about that. There is no relationship between any immunization and autism. Any vaccination and autism. So let's question that. The Stratton study came out in 2000. They found out that there was a huge association between thimerosal and autism. And all 4 of my kids were born during the Vaccinology cell generation from about 1990 to 2001. The study was being done in about 2000. And this is what they found, a relative risk of 7.62, as well as you got ADHD, ADD, sleep disorders, huge problems. So maybe there's a big relationship between mercury and autism. And then when we did the numbers a different way, the autism shot up to 11.35 relative risk. So that's even a bigger relationship. Ready to back up? So this was Thomas D. Stratton, the lead author of the 5-aerosol study, and he wrote to his colleagues, and he said it just won't go away. He was talking about the connection between thimerosal and autism. The relationship just won't go away. And then Simpson, what was called, when they brought in the CDC, the industry players. Many people say this was an illegal meeting because it brought in the regulatory agencies with the industry. And the purpose of the meeting was to say, we've got a problem here. How are we going to handle this problem? Well, Dr. John Clements, who works for the World Health Organization, obviously he would be concerned about the health of the children he vaccinates, right? Well, this is what he said. I am really concerned, so he is concerned, that we have taken off like a boat going down one arm of the mangrove swamp at high speed when in fact there was not enough discussion really early on about which way the boat should go at all. And I really want to risk offending everyone in the room by saying that perhaps this study should not have been done at all. What? Because the outcome of it could have, to some extent, been predicted. And we have all reached this point where we are left hanging. So he's concerned. He's concerned about his neck.
Is this in your book?
Yes. Yeah, it's all in the book. So, moving on from thimerosal, we've got William Thompson, the CDC whistleblower, who came out 2 years ago. He was struggling with all of this corruption that he was involved in way back in the early 2000s. And he actually had to go right to the head of the CDC and wrote a letter to Julie Gerberding and said, I will have to present several problematic results related to statistical associations between receipt of MMR vaccine and autism. You can bet he didn't present anything. They pulled him from the roster and they brought in Frank Stefano, who lied very capably. So the relationship between the MMR vaccine and autism leave the CDC hanging. Excess risk. That left the kids hanging. It's a good thing the CDC has garbage cans. The movie Vaxxed is nothing more than the story of the CDC whistleblower, Thompson. And we learned from that movie that the CDC really has left us all hanging, except for the people that perhaps deserve to hang. There are many people that would do away with the question marks there. So the nursing video says it's important to vaccinate on time. We learned from William Thompson that by vaccinating on time, the risk of autism increases 2.36 times for African American boys, or 7 times for kids who have no other comorbid conditions, meaning the kids are absolutely normal, they get the vaccine, and they get autism. And that's what he found, this isolated autism. So maybe it's important not to vaccinate on time. This is what the study was all about, the risk of vaccinating on time versus delaying the vaccinations. So if you do it according to the CDC schedule, this is your increased risk versus waiting until your child is 3 years old to start to get the MMR vaccine. So the immune system can handle 100,000 immunizations simultaneously. So many people say, well, Paul Offit was just spouting off. It was not true, but this is one of the top 10 nursing programs in the country that puts this out here that says that my granddaughter can handle 100,000 vaccines at a time. And I have to say, seriously? 100,000? And their answer is, seriously. This is a screenshot from the video. They had to put this up here so that you would know that they are serious. They're not messing around here. 100,000 vaccines. 100,000 vaccines total 50 liters or 13.2 gallons of vaccine solution. Seriously? This is a book I highly recommend. 400 important scientific papers that exposes all sorts of problems with vaccinations. 400 different studies. The author of this book, Neil Miller, just had an article published in Journal of American Physicians and Surgeons this past summer. And he analyzed the VAERS data, the data that showed vaccine injury that the government keeps. And he found that the more vaccines a child gets at a time, the greater the risk of harm. And the younger the children get the vaccines, the greater the risk of harm. Which again, it's just common sense. The more you would never give a baby 5 pharmaceutical drugs when it's 2 months old. And yet we think nothing of injecting 5 or 8 when they're 2 months old. All right, so evidence of the vaccine paradigm in the government. This is an important quote here. This is recorded in the Federal Register, June 1st, 1984. They were amending the rules for the polio vaccine. And they came out and said that we cannot allow any possible doubts, whether or not well-founded, about the safety of the vaccine. That cannot be allowed to exist. In view of the need to assure that the vaccine will continue to be used to the maximum extent consistent with the nation's public health objectives. So vaccinating people with a harmful vaccine is in accordance with the CDC's public health objective. Vaccinate regardless. That seems to be the public health objective. Back in 2013, Bill Posey and Carolyn Maloney proposed this bill to do a vax versus unvaxxed study. And right in the bill, they had to write, nothing in this act shall be construed to authorize the conduct or support of any study in which an individual or population is encouraged or incentivized to remain unvaccinated. So this is the paradigm at work here. Even if they had done the study and found what we all know they could find, that vax-free kids who have not been injected with toxins are healthier than vaccinated kids, they could not publicize it. They would have to bury the data. They would have to pull out the garbage can and chuck it, because if they didn't do it, they would be incentivizing people to remain unvaccinated. This is government policy. It's government edict. Vaccines are safe and effective. That's the edict. You shall not say anything different. So last year in July, Bill Posey stood up on the floor of the House and said it's our duty to bring William Thompson in and interview him. He went on to say that he begs, pleads, and implores to get him in, get him interviewed. And now a year later, virtually nothing's happened. There's been a lot of things happening behind the scenes, but as far as we can see publicly, nothing's moving forward. And I have to wonder whether it's because bringing him in would violate the government edict. You can't bring him in and have him say what he needs to say when the position in government is we cannot allow any doubt to exist. That's government policy. How can you bring a guy in and talk about that when you're not allowed to say that? So evidence of the paradigm in the media. You know, I think it's long since past time that we give up the idea that the news is news. And so when people that are owned by Big Pharma talk about vaccines, this is what you would expect to read. The research linking autism to vaccines is even more bogus than you think. One thing we do know about vaccines, about autism, vaccines aren't to blame. Retracted autism study, elaborate fraud, Disneyland, it's blaming all those unvaxxed kids. Yeah, they're the people, they're the ones causing the problems. And so, aside from pharma being paying off media, Kathleen Sebelius, who was the Secretary of Health and Human Services, went on record with Reader's Digest and said, we have reached out to the media outlets to try to get them not to give the views of these people equal weight. So, there it is. You've got the government enforcing censorship with the media. Welcome to America. What time you got?
8:15.
8:15. I'm gonna cut this short. I think we can do. just kind of countered all the official doctrine that I showed in the first slide. I'll start with this one. People who vaccinate are smart, scientifically minded, responsible members of society. That is true. And people who are not as educated vaccinate. That is true as well. But the fact is, vaccination compliance is inversely proportional to the level of education. Now, the way the media spins that is that there's white privilege going on, and it's rich white people who are to blame for the fact that we're not vaccinated. The fact is, there's rich white people who read who don't vaccinate. There's also other people of other colors, other races who are researching and they're not vaccinating as well. The bottom line is, when education goes up, vaccination compliance goes down. I challenge anyone to find more than a handful of people in the U.S. that could disprove this statement. So it's official, vaccines don't work as advertised, they do more harm than good, they're brought to the market by junk science and fraud, and the vaccine empire is run by crooks. So I had a piece in there earlier about how they indoctrinate doctors, and we didn't get to go through that now. But I wanted you to think about, when they tell you to ask your doctor, these are some of the things you might ask your doctor. Do they tell patients that vaccines are causally linked to ADHD, allergies, asthma, and autism, and more than 200 adverse events? Wouldn't that be a good question to ask your doctor? Do they tell parents that fevers, screaming, lethargy, seizures, vomiting, and diarrhea are just normal reactions to vaccines? And a lot of doctors do that. Are they trained to recognize and document vaccine injury? Probably not, because vaccine injury doesn't happen because vaccines are safe and effective. Have they ever documented a vaccine injury? Have they read the vaccine package inserts? I'm learning as I watch videos online for the vaccine, many haven't. They have not read the vaccine package inserts. Do they share the vaccine package inserts with their patients? Do they honor the medical ethic of informed consent and informed dissent? I believe that the whole paradigm, as far as doctors go, is based on abuse and misuse of power, because they believe their job is to vaccinate, when really their job is to provide informed consent. Anytime you've got somebody else who thinks it's their job to inject something into your body or your child's body, there's a misuse of power going on here. There's abuse going on here. We tell our kids, don't let anyone put anything in your body against your will, and yet we go to the doctor and we get forced, persuaded, intimidated, coerced to allow them to put things in our kids' bodies or our own bodies. Have they ever made a report to VAERS? Do they ask parents if their children have ever experienced a vaccine injury?
Can you go back to that one more time?
I'm going to try to get there.
Is that a vaccine reaction?
Reporting.
There you go.
Many haven't. And many, I'm learning, don't, because even if they recognize there's a vaccine injury, filling out the form takes so much time that they just say, forget it, I'm not going there. So the vaccine adverse event reporting system is a voluntary-based system. And people say that between 1% and 10% of vaccine injuries are ever reported. And
Isn't that the same as clinical reports? Or do they call it that, or do they call it clinical reports? Clinical reports basically reporting an adverse reaction or an anomaly.
On the VAERS, you can actually go online and self-report.
Okay.
yes, thank you. Parents can report to the VAERS system. You do not have to depend on your doctor to do that.
Oh, okay. So the doctors use clinical reports, and we can use
The doctors are supposed to use the VAERS system, and we can use it as well. This is where the government tracks vaccine injury. And this is how they look at it and say, well, this is what we're seeing or not seeing. But it's so underreported that we have to multiply it perhaps 100-fold at least to get to the true
There
numbers.
needs to be a public campaign to let us know that we have the power to put information in that large database. That's the first time I've ever knew that. I'm 57 years old. I've never known
Yes.
I could report
Parents can
anything.
do that.
I can never report anything. I would do that. I had to do it through a doctor.
But have they ever documented in a patient's chart that the vaccines are contraindicated due to previous vaccine injury or to circumstance? If I went into my doctor, well, I'll tell you my story. I got an antibiotic as a kid. I had a negative reaction, and every time I go into the doctor, ever since then, 50-some years ago, they've said, "Are you allergic to anything?" I tell them, they write it down. Never have I been asked, "Have you ever had an adverse reaction to a vaccine?" And if they do, they often wouldn't write it down. And it wouldn't be noted in a chart, it wouldn't get the same weight, and I believe that's the paradigm at work. Because if they put down there, this kid had an adverse reaction to this vaccine, what are they going to do then? When their commission and their mandate is to vaccinate. I would ask doctors if they vaccinate their own kids on schedule, including the hepatitis B vaccine at birth. I would ask if they know about William Thompson, the CDC fraud, and the movie Vaxxed. I would ask, are they aware that the vaccine schedule is never been tested for safety? Do they know that vaccines are more dangerous when administered at the same time, at an earlier age, or when the patients are sick? Do they know that genetic variables increase the risk of vaccine injury? Are they compensated for vaccinated patients or punished for non-vaccinated patients? We get a yes there. Do they make vaccinated patients sign abuse contracts for refusing to vaccinate their kids? This is all official from the American Academy of Pediatrics. Pull out the abuse contract which says, I recognize that by not vaccinating my kid, I understand that I am doing my kid harm. As you sign on the line thinking that you're just saying, I'm not going to vaccinate. You sign that form, you're essentially giving the authorities permission to come in and investigate who would possibly take the kids out of your home because you signed the abuse contract. Don't sign it. Have they ever reported or threatened to report parents for refusing to vaccinate? Have they ever kicked families out of their practice for not vaccinating? Are they afraid to speak openly with patients about vaccines? Those are good questions.
Can you put that back? I'm sorry.
So, August 15th, 2016, the CDC posted on the internet this control of communicable diseases, a proposed rule by the Department of Health and Human Services, CDC. And this is where they're proposing to increase their ability to quarantine, isolate, and contain people in order to control disease, ostensibly. And what they're proposing is so outrageous, so crazy, that a dystopian author would have had to make this up to make this seem real. And yet when you read this, it is real. It's being proposed right now. This is the website. If you have not gone there and read this proposal, it's like 80 pages long. If you haven't read it, be prepared, because it's hard to read. It's written by lawyers. But when you get down and read it, you go, oh my goodness. They are really proposing to be able to move into a community and declare a community, either communicable or pre-communicable. They can go in and say that this town is pre-communicable and say, you're shut down. And you don't get out of jail until you roll up your sleeves and get all the vaccines. It's all linked to public travel. We won't be able to do public travel soon, unless, because of the rules that they have, someone coughs on an airplane, boom, the plane is quarantined, line up, you're not getting out until you get the vaccines. It's a great way to circumvent the legislative process. And in the name of public health, they can make sure that everybody submits to the tyranny, and it won't have to go through the legislative process anymore.
So we still have time to comment on that.
October 14th is the deadline. Please go to this site and comment.
Is that a state or federal?
It's a federal.
But Silver was saying that that's a way for them to get data on us. So I kind of went there, but I asked too much information, and so I couldn't.
Well, you know, if you do submit, I don't think you can do it anonymously.
Yeah.
So, yeah, you will be identified as one of those people.
Yeah.
So when you make comments, though, make sure that your comments are based on science.
And
based
rational and straightforward.
on civil liberties, science, rational arguments, not emotion.
Some of the comment, Kristen did not coach a lot of the people that have voiced comments thus far. And these are this is Heather Snow. Well, it looks like she did a scientific-based statement, but many people started talking about history, Nazis, and they start talking about their guns and what's going to happen if CDC comes after them. People are not happy about this proposal, and nor should they be. I think it's cute, it's amusing that they ask for comments because they know darn well that nobody would say, yeah, we're anxious to have our rights taken away, please take them away. But if they can get us scared enough about benign diseases like Zika, people will say, yes, please, make me secure, make me feel safe, I'll give up my rights. So again, there's the website. Okay, so who is really anti-science? When the people in the vaccine industry can't really give us the truth, tell us the truth about the science of vaccinations, I would suggest that they are anti-science. Who are the real vaccine deniers? I would suggest that they are the vaccine deniers because they have to hide the truth about what vaccines really are. If they were everything they profess that they're purported to be, they would tell us the truth about them. And who is really anti-vaccine? I would suggest that they are. Because if they weren't, they would say, this is it. This is everything we've got. We're proud of it. We want you to know about it. Here's the package insert. Read it. So the bottom line, the pharmaceutical industry is a criminally run legal drug cartel. Vaccines are the largest bait and switch scheme in the history of medical science and maybe even in the history of commerce. The bait and switch is that they sell people on the concept of vaccines. The paradigm, it's a concept. Safe and effective, good, bad, evil, good, all of that. But what we get when we get vaccinated is the reality. We get the chemicals, we get the toxins. Concept versus reality. It's a bait and switch scheme. The industry teaches medical professionals and the herd about the concept of vaccines, not about the reality of vaccines. The culture of vaccination is founded on fraud, fear, greed, and tyranny. Vaccination policies and procedures violate the principle of informed consent. Medical professionals are both victims and perpetrators of the vaccine culture. I have a chapter in my book called Gods, Pawns, and Perpetrators, as in a pawn in a chess game. And it's about doctors and the role they play in this, in vaccinations. And they are very much victims in this. The doctors who really are aware and informed either go underground and be quiet so they can pay off their debt, or they have to leave, which leaves the vaccine believers who very often take great pleasure in acting like tyrants and kicking people out of their practice and shaming, intimidating, coercing, traumatizing young mothers who are scared to death. They go in and they've got this guy in a white coat who treats them in an abusive way. It is absolutely an abusive relationship. Vaccination is an act of violence. It is. It's an unnatural act done to the human body. Vaccine injury denial is an act of violence, which often happens to young mothers who call up 12 hours later and say, my kid is screaming, the mother is hysterical. And then we get the vaccine injury denial. Take 2 aspirin, call me in the morning. Give the kid 2 Tylenol, call me in the morning. Happens all the time.
That's even more of the problem.
Yeah.
Giving Tylenol.
Yeah, bad advice, Tylenol makes the effect worse. Vaccine injury is 100%. All we're talking about is the degree of injury. And the herd is waking up, and unconstitutional vaccine mandates are coming. So what should happen? Immediate moratorium on all vaccines. That's my position. Criminal investigations, prosecutions, and convictions. Compensation for victims, which is everyone. And what will happen? Further vaccine mandates. Further epidemics of vaccine injury, disease, disability, and death. And revolution. And revolution is a scary word, but I would like to suggest that revolution is happening here in this room tonight. We're all part of this revolution. Revolution happens internally first. It's a product of the mind first. And how revolution ultimately plays out, there will come a time when enough people will say, too many people have been injured, we can't do this anymore, and people need to pay, and we need to stop this nonsense. How that happens exactly, I don't know, and I'm certainly not proposing violence. But when you hurt people's kids, violence can be expected. You don't hurt people's kids without having people get upset about it. And that may take many forms. So the final paragraph of my book, JABBED, is freedom emerges out of tyranny and revolution is the path to freedom. That statement is not a call to arms, it's historical fact. The only remaining question is when will vaccine sociopaths have injured and killed enough people to spark a revolution? Dr. Andrew Wakefield gave the answer. Now is the time to overthrow the corporate rule of this country and bring the power back to the people. Thank you very much. That's the presentation. Let's keep the cameras running. And what time do we have now? 8:30? Okay, so we are in here until probably 10 to 9 safely. And then we need to be out of here and close up by 9 o'clock. So if there are questions or comments, anything you'd like to say, this should be the conversation. Why some people's kids are too noisy.
Their brains have been overloaded by toxins.
That's exactly what it means. Thank you very much.
That's good. So the comment I was going to make is one of the things, I don't vaccinate my children, and many of my sisters don't either. We have 4 confirmed VAERS vaccine-injured children in our family and 2 others suspected. So we don't vaccinate. But as I sat and watched the movie Vast, one of the things I do, I own a company called Effective Advocacy, and I teach people how to effectively advocate to the government, and I do a lot of lobbying type activities. And as I watched that movie, it occurred to me the power behind this is a lot bigger than any of us thought. The Justice Department alone is on the hook for over $1 trillion if they admit all of the fraud of the CDC. That's just the Justice Department. Not to mention that the drug companies will lose roughly $1 trillion each. And when you're dealing with money in the T, trillions, it's not going to come out. If William Thompson does get subpoenaed, he's either going to plead the fifth or die, literally. And so we can't necessarily fight this at a huge level. We need to fight it at our level, protecting our children. So I think the most important thing that we can do is make sure that in our state that we continue to have the parental rights to opt out. When you tell people truth, they can feel it in their heart. When people are lied to, they can feel it in their heart. We continue to preach truth and let the parents that will listen, listen. But if we put all of our efforts on trying to expose this huge fraud, we will not get anywhere because people will die before it happens. We need to take the time in our state here in Utah or in California or in Wyoming, and we need to make sure that our state continues to let us as parents protect our children and opt them out. That's very much the impression that I've gotten from the work that I've done.
Thank you. I think we're still going here. It looks like we're running.
I have a question. Do you have any references on vaccines inducing allergies or autoimmune diseases?
Well, I have, my book has about 1,000 citations in it. If you look at the package inserts, you will see all about the allergies. You will see all about the autoimmune disorders. One of the best sites out there, among many, is GreenMed Info. They document 200. What's that for?
This is for the MMR, and I've highlighted all of the warnings and contraindications and things that have happened with the vaccine. These are all reported.
If you go to GreenMed Info, type in vaccines and autoimmune disorders, whatever, and you will get study after study after study documenting these things. And if you go to nvic.org, National Vaccine Information Center, they're the most well-known vaccine-informed advocacy group that has been addressing this issue now for decades.
Is there a site that you can go to that actually has all the printouts like that?
Immunize.org has a lot of them.
But I thought it's not complete like these? Or
Yeah, I am not sure. I haven't gone through.
Compared them all.
I use the package inserts from immunize.org for the writing of my book, and they are the official documents, the official PDFs from the pharmaceutical companies that make the vaccine.
Have you seen the whole meeting the parents part? The part that is just, you're supposed to cut it off and give it to the parents? Have you seen that?
I have not noticed that,
So then you don't have the same ones.
no. So they make something separate for the parents.
I need to go and compare. I haven't had time to read them all and compare them all.
It's fascinating reading. It's very
Yeah, so the
fascinating.
concern is the ones that are online aren't the same as the ones in the box.
I really couldn't answer that.
Yeah.
There is one, vaccinesafety.edu, and then / package insert. So if you go to vaccinesafety.edu, it has the big complete insert.
Thank you.
Can you comment on Nagalase?
Nagalase. Am I saying that right? I don't know much about that, and I did not talk about that in my book, but I understand that the people that have been tracking the doctors that have been showing up dead over the last couple of years, it's connected to Nagalase, which is connected to curing cancer. Is that correct?
No, that's actually,
Well, pretty much all.
it's the bad adjuvant that essentially is a byproduct of cancer. But they've also found Nagalase, there was insinuations that Nagalase was in the vaccines and somehow getting in there because that's what was showing up in autistic children. In their guts, they were seeing high levels of Nagalase and they can't figure out where the Nagalase was coming from. This was particularly information that Jeffrey Bradstreet was the one that essentially had discovered this anomaly, and he was trying to figure out where the Nagalase was coming from. And he never got to finish that, but there was some possibilities that there was hot lots or some sort of comorbid adjuvants and the constituents that are inside the vaccine actually creating Nagalase.
I'll tell you that as far as JABBED goes in my book, I made every attempt to stick with stuff that was clearly substantiated.
Yeah.
And I didn't go out on a limb on anything. I did mention the doctors who are showing up dead in rivers and whatnot. Am I missing faces? Okay.
You got mine.
Okay.
We're gonna stop.
So I mentioned the dead doctors, but what I said was we really don't have firm evidence about who's doing that. But I did mention that it was Merck back several years ago that said that they would hunt down doctors and find them where they live when we were talking about the Vioxx scandal. And when they came out and said, hey, there's problems with Vioxx, that was an internal email that said we can hunt these doctors down and find them where they live. That's a pretty aggressive talk. It does suggest that we are capable of doing some pretty aggressive things.
I just looked up the MMR on the Merck site, and the whole thing is there, and there's a page and a half of things that can happen to you with the vaccination.
Yeah, the package inserts, although I would not trust them 100% because they are from the industry, so I still don't think they're representative of truth, but it's far more than what you would get when you get the vaccine information sheet from your doctor, which is what the doctors are giving parents of young children to convince them that disease is bad and vaccines are good.
Is there anything in your book about hot lots?
I do mention briefly that it was which company was it that it was found out that through an internal email that I think it was Wyatt, I think. Is that correct? Wyatt, is that who you say that?
I can't remember.
That's what you say.
Wyatt, yeah, there was an internal document where they were aware that a particular vaccine was killing too many kids, and doctors and parents would be aware of it. So their solution, rather than recall the hot lot, was to distribute the hot lot around the country so that the dead babies would be nicely distributed across the country so people wouldn't associate it with a bad vaccine. And
Is that a practice that's still being used? I mean, that
it
was
is still legal. It is still legal for the pharmaceutical industries to
lots.
distribute the lots across wide geographic areas, yes.
So you can't really figure it out when there's a problem.
Right. It makes it much harder to track the hot lab.
Anything on growing vaccines in human fetus cultures? Or
In the
genetic
book?
cultures?
In my book, I do mention that the vaccines are growing in human fetus cultures, and that is associated with some medical problems, autoimmune responses, and I do mention it also as well in a chapter that has a strong religious focus. I have a chapter in the book called Thou Shalt Have No Other God Before the Gods of Vaccinology, and I talk about how they're going after people of faith to take away their religious rights, and I talk about many arguments from a religious perspective that could be used to justify not getting the vaccines.
Do you have any comment on the high rates of autism in Utah?
Do I have any comments on higher rates of autism in Utah? I will express my personal belief here, and it's not backed by science exactly, but I did read, and I do have in my book, that Utah has the highest rates of autism in the country among white kids. And people of color have a much lower rate. Now that could be associated with a whole lot of factors, but I do suggest that it could be because white people in the state of Utah are LDS, and LDS people generally believe, by and large, that the church is a proponent of vaccination, and that even God is pro-vaccine. And I know when I posted my letter on the internet to the church, and I had people come out and say, yes, God is pro-vaccine, and yes, you're not faithful if you're not vaccinated. And so there are many LDS people who believe that. So I think
So the responses that you got?
yes, on my where I posted my letter, those were responses that came in. And so I do believe that many LDS people are getting a double whammy. They're getting not only the authority figures from the CDC, they're getting their perception that the LDS Church wants them to vaccinate, and if they don't, they are unfaithful.
If you follow what the BYU Nursing School is propounding, that's very credible.
Yeah, you look at that video and you see that it goes from bad to worse, and that video is just hideously bad.
Well, and on top of that, scientifically, there are 3 factors why Utah actually has the highest autism rate in the world.
And having a higher vaccination rate.
Well, one of the reasons is because we had a governor whose first lady during his entire term of office, who, by the way, later became the chair of the head of the Health and Human Services Division of the U.S., and gave the scientists who frauded the MMR vaccine, he actually gave them a prize for great health for children. His wife spent her entire time as First Lady of Utah doing the campaign, Immunize by 2, it's up to you. Utah is the only state that has had a campaign run. Mike Levitt's wife, during her entire tenure as First Lady of the state of Utah, said, Immunize by 2, it's up to you. He later became the chair of the Health and Human Services for the United States of America and gave the fraudulent scientists a prize for their work on the vaccine MMR autism study. That's 1. 2, the 3rd most toxic neurotoxin is copper, and we live in the same valley as the world's 2nd largest open pit copper mine, and we have an inversion regularly. The 3rd reason is there's a gene variant called the MTFHR gene, and that gene tends to be very high in populations with blue eyes and brown hair. The white population in the state of Utah tends to be very Western European. Look at me as an example, brown hair and blue eyes. I've got 5 siblings with brown hair and blue eyes, and I have 2 children with brown hair and blue eyes. It's very common. 40% of people, on average, with this gene variant will react poorly to toxins like copper and vaccines. So we've got a genetic predisposition, an environmental, and we live in a state with a religion and a first lady who said immunize by 2, it's up to you. And remember, you have a 700% more likely chance of reacting poorly to vaccines if you vaccinate before the age of 3. That creates the perfect storm.
So your
Thank you. Thank you.
Do we have a high vaccination rate?
One of the highest, Connecticut and US are Connecticut and Utah are the two states with the highest vaccination rate.
And when you have all these Mormon missionaries going overseas, you're.
Yeah.
But I'm talking about the vaccination rate for kindergarten, childhood vaccine.
Okay.
And it's directly correlated to be immunized by 2 and such.
But see, the belief in the doctrine of vaccinology is reinforced by missionaries
Yes.
and
Yeah.
military.
Absolutely.
Has there been any study done to show higher rates of autism in military families?
Yes, there is.
I assume there's been official studies. I do hear that military families have higher rates of autism.
Because they tend to get all the vaccines.
I've heard that.
There's another, are you guys aware that there's a class action lawsuit against the state of Utah because they are systematically underrepresenting the autism rate? Not only does Utah have the highest autism rate, but there's there's a federal whistleblower, there's a class action lawsuit against the state of Utah for under, it is class action. So, for example, in my family, we have 3 children that are autistic. Not a single one of them was counted in the Utah numbers because Utah only counted children at age 8 who had an IEP for autism or ASD. They're not counting medical records, they're not counting children that were homeschooled, children that are in private schools, or children that are diagnosed later. They're only counting children at age 8 that had an IEP in a public school. And so there's actually a lawsuit against the state of Utah for underreporting autism. It's an individual education plan.
So it qualifies for special.
Yeah, so it's a special ed. So unless your child is receiving special ed services in the state of Utah at age 8, they don't count it.
I think
Yes.
you're talking about.
So it's severely underreported.
Not even younger than.
No, unless, so if your child has enough occupational therapy that by age 8 they don't need an IEP anymore, but they're still autistic, they are not counted in the state of Utah.
I believe you're referring to Judith Pinborough Zimmerman,
Yes.
who is, she was working for the University of Utah, and she became aware of some anomalies in what was happening, and she went to the people at the U and said, this is going on, this is wrong, and she was fired.
She's fired.
And now she has filed a lawsuit. And I had breakfast with Judy yesterday morning in Salt Lake, and she explains the nitty-gritty and the details of the lawsuit. It's fascinating details, but she did say that what she said about the numbers was a little bit different than what you're saying, and I'm not saying that what you're saying is inaccurate, but she said there was a young, inexperienced person coding autism in Utah, and she was using the wrong code. And so a lot of the kids that would have gotten an autism diagnosis would have been flagged with that diagnosis, which would have then introduced more research to find out whether it really was autism. It was missed. And then Judy went to the CDC and said, we've missed these numbers, we need to redo these numbers. And the CDC said, don't worry about it, just leave it alone. And so Utah already had the highest rates of autism in the country, and they should have been higher if they were to be accurate. And the CDC said, leave it alone. Judy also said yesterday morning that the CDC commissions various states to do these studies, and the states that produced the highest rates of autism did not have their grants renewed during the next cycle. Where are we at with the time?
Right at.
8:50? Okay, if there's not any pressing,
It's not pressing, sorry. Just a curiosity, do we know the correlation between African Americans and the increased frequency of autism?
do we know why the African American boys are experiencing that greater rate? I don't think we do, and I'm going to say something that has no, I haven't read it anywhere. Maybe I have, maybe it's accurate or not. But immunocompromised people respond more poorly to vaccinations. We can expect greater injury from people who are immunocompromised. That's what they say, don't vaccinate the immunocompromised. Well, if you're African American and you're living in Minnesota and you're not getting enough vitamin D because of the color of your skin, you are immunocompromised. And so I would suggest that perhaps very low levels of vitamin D, which triggers all sorts of problems in our functioning, that could make people susceptible to the toxins and vaccines, which could lead to a greater rate of autism. And the boys more than the girls, because we know through, I forget the name of the people that have done the study, that show that testosterone is synergistically toxic with thimerosal and with aluminum. So boys, that's why boys are getting autism at a 4 to 5 greater rate than girls. So that's my theory, that could be it, and I don't know whether there's anything to it or not. Okay, thank you very much. One more?
Well, you did a book on books on GMOs, and so you understand the bad actors in the GMO cycle, and Monsanto, and the glyphosate and so forth. It seems like you would be more, of a spokesperson to understand the comorbid conditions that are essentially existing between the GMOs and the vaccine, working in a synergistic mode, or at least a comorbid situation, to cause this, this off-the-charts exponential sort of rate that's going on. And you didn't talk about that in your
Okay,
and it seems like that's something you really have a lot of.
I do have a lot of knowledge about the subject of GMOs, and again, with my GMO book, I primarily did not focus on the science of GMOs as much as I did the corruption of the people that bring the GMOs to market. The same is true for my book, JABBED, because I am not a scientist and I am not a doctor, and if I pretended to be, I would be written off quickly. They would say, this guy has no credentials, and it's true. I do not speak as a scientist, I do not speak as a doctor. But Stephanie Seneff, who was in the movie Vax, has done extensive research on glyphosate, and extensive research on aluminum in vaccines and the synergistic toxicity between the two. And Stephanie Seneff's name is on the back of all 3 of my books, my 2 Monsanto books and my book JABBED. And this is what Stephanie Seneff has to say. Brett Wilcox has done it again, this time taking on Big Pharma and the global vaccination program. JABBED is a must-read, especially if you still think vaccines are provably safe and effective. Toxic ingredients in vaccines work synergistically with glyphosate in food to damage children. And I quote Stephanie Seneff in my book, linking the damage from GMOs to the damage from vaccines and the synergistic toxicity between the two.
And comment perhaps a little bit on the way that glyphosate is ending up in vaccines.
I have no comment other than what I'm reading, the same thing that you're reading. Glyphosate is everywhere. I eat a pretty clean diet. I try my best to stay away from GMOs. I try my best to do organic. And I had my urine tested about a year ago, and I came out very high with glyphosate. Needless to say, I was not thrilled to see that I had Monsanto within me as much as
all those vaccinations.
It was not vaccinations in my case. Thank you very much. We have some copies of JABBED here. If you'd like to purchase them tonight, I've got them on hand. It's been a pleasure and an honor. Thank you again, Kristen, for making this happen tonight. And Jasmine, thank you very much. Thanks a lot. We're going to sign off.
How much are the books?
$20. $2 going to get it.
That would be great. Thank you very much. Thank you all for coming. People have been watching, we'll be doing this on Thursday in August.
Yes, that's right. 7:30. South August.
And are all you guys signed up to be on the legislative email list so that when there's legislation, did everybody sign up for that? Where is it? I didn't bring it. But if you want to,
Thank you.
let me just get a scrap of
$20.
Do you have a tendency to lose things?
I will do a deal on the books. I'll go 15 if you promise me that you'll write a review on Amazon.
It will let you order from Amazon.
What's that?
You can just go on, I don't know.
My book is on Amazon, yes.
Okay.
It's It's
It
1994.
doesn't make sure you order it from Amazon.
If you order it from Amazon, it shows that you are, whatever they call it, verified purchaser.
Oh, verified thing.
Yeah. Then when you do the review, it looks a little more complicated. But I would, whether you pay 15 or 20, I would appreciate it if you do reviews, because there will be people that will give this book a 1-star review. That reduces the book's visibility when people are searching for it, and it reduces the book's reachability. People say, I'm not going to buy that because people said such and such about it. Positive vaccines help. I mean, positive endorsements. Review the book. Thank you.
I'm getting changed from my phone. I remember somebody's watching me, so I'm getting It's 20 minutes.
I've all done research.
You have to reverse it. Yes, yeah. So my sister actually, yeah, so my sister actually, it's so many people.
Probably not gonna get much more. What do you want? You want water?
Let's have water, okay?
So that's what I do with my kids. So I don't have I agree. You should see it.
I haven't read it yet.
Are you working for him or for yourself?
Correct. I'm a son.
For you?
Yeah.
I saw some other people recording it, but this is, there's just so much stuff just going over. I needed something that I need, just like a lecture, when you record a lecture. Just so I can hear it. How could I get a
Well,
this is right, I mean, his life is on the order. That's not, I'm a statistician, but I work for health insurance, the biggest issue. Anyway, I'm newly married. What do? I keep interrupting you and I'm not having you use the information.
no, they're fine. Probably the best thing. We're not getting popcorn right now.
How did she know that was popcorn?
She loves popcorn. I worked at a movie theater for one of my previous jobs. I just got done with it like a month ago and she loves popcorn. We have a popcorn machine at home too, so it actually looks almost exactly like that one. I think probably the best thing you can do is going to be talk to Brett. I'm guessing if you give him like your email address or something like that, he'll probably email you the PowerPoint presentation. He's having me record this for him, so I'm sure he's going to end up putting it somewhere. I don't know exactly where.
Email him my email address.
I don't even know his email address. Kind of sad, huh?
You know this was all live on Facebook.
That's what I was asking.
Yeah, he live streamed it all on Facebook, so you can, if you're his Facebook friend, you can go and I believe watch this. I'll check right now, but.
That was really nice of him. Isn't it great to be able to stand up for something, right? You get to actually matter. You don't have to wonder.
he was on his way out, and they called him and said he can't. He's really nightmare, and so we worked it out with him to do it that night. But then Paul Raleigh did a story.
Oh, yes.
And you know who's first
So I know my kids have, there's only one doctor.
So I don't know how much we had to do that.
Off the cars.
You know, it would be interesting to talk to him about this because of Becky's. Because he's involved in Becky. There's I know I saw his picture on the yeah, so he knows it. I'm not about this, but about undiagnosed diseases. So I think it would be really interesting to try to approach him on this. I'm not sure if I want to do it. He doesn't really understand. I can talk to him, he's nice. You know, the automatic delegate thing. They had a whole even though it took away my dogmas, I would have been an automatic state delegate for the last 6 years.
So my kids don't even
Honestly, I think that
Number two, you can start giving them
I saw somebody set those down.
She doesn't like what he does. And he knows that he likes it. And he knows exactly what he doesn't want it. USAA
Lies, generalized, medical science. It's a job.
Gray matter. And so if a girl is vaccinated,
realize, I didn't start questioning.
her brain has the ability to use certain pathways get damaged. Her brain is other pathways. Whereas the boy has like half as many pathways, and those pathways are damaged. It's not that they're any more damaged or any less damaged, it's that they're damaged. Because they don't have other pathways to get us that information. So for example, when you look at, there's quite a few people that they got studies on that are non-verbal autistic with IQs of like 150. And they're almost always, and because they've got the info in their brain, in the brain, they just can't get the info to you because that's the one. So you're going to see a 4-to-1 prevalence, and it's not because boys are more damaged than girls, it's because we can see the damage through the symptoms.
You're a very good teacher.
I'm really good at powers.
No, no,
I don't. I'm a mom who's an engineer and started in medical complex. In fact, I was going to ask you, I know your first book was on JABBED, if you want to write a third book on autism, I just had 3 where did you get all this information? I'm like, through my mind. They're like, well, that doesn't do me any good. I'm like,
Thank you so much.
Gifted speaker, express yourself.
That's what I think about. See, I couldn't really start because on a stage, I'm missing, and then I take the keynote, but I don't speak on I speak on things like goal setting.
This gives you a platform. Write a book and all of a sudden you're an expert. And you're already an expert. You just need a book and say, here's my book.
Is this yours? Yes, that's it. That's fine. Warning, I'm very vocal on politics.
If you don't get offended on my parents,
Okay, we're clearly about the other person you should follow is look under mine. Margie Green is my mom, and every medical conference I've attended, I brought her with me. Because we tend to hear different things, and then we can compare and research.
I love that research.
And every time I don't have time to read a book, I buy it on Amazon and have it shipped to her house. You went to the bookstore the other day. I'm like, oh yeah, can you read that? And let me look for any information. And she's like, yeah, no problem. Sorry, guys.
thank you.
Would you like to?
Say hi, bye. Bye, Diane.
Your pictures of the screen.
Greg, do you want me to
Oh,
go in
okay.
here with the chairs?
Yeah.
Thanks, Brett. Thank you.
So it is.
Yes.
What do you?
Okay, we gotta get out of here, guys. They're trying to close up. Did somebody leave a water bottle? Is that yours?
That's mine. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.